There is a quiet assumption most people carry without ever examining it. They believe that someone who was deeply deceived must remain, on some level, easy to deceive. That a person who stayed too long in a damaging relationship has a flaw in their perception that will follow them permanently. That surviving manipulation is evidence of weakness rather than the slow, brutal acquisition of a skill most people will never possess. This assumption is not just wrong, it is dangerously wrong. And the individuals who disprove it most thoroughly are the ones you will rarely hear coming. The person who walked away from a narcissist did not simply leave a bad situation. They completed an involuntary apprenticeship in human mechanics. Every tactic they endured became a data point. Every broken promise became a reference file. Every cycle of warmth followed by withdrawal, of praise followed by punishment, of closeness followed by calculated distance, etched itself into a system of detection that now operates without conscious effort. They did not choose this education, but they graduated from it with a degree in pattern recognition that no classroom could ever replicate. What makes this individual difficult to understand from the outside is that their transformation is invisible. They do not advertise what they see. They do not walk into rooms announcing their history or wearing their survival as a badge. In fact, the most thoroughly recalibrated survivors are the ones who say the least. Their silence is not passivity, it is processing. They are reading the room the way an engineer reads a schematic, identifying where the load-bearing walls are, where the structural weaknesses hide, and where the entire framework is likely to collapse if pressure is applied at just the right angle. They see it all, and they say almost nothing. This is not intuition in the mystical sense. It is not a gift, and it is not paranoia dressed in sophisticated language. It is calibration through exposure. The survivor of narcissistic abuse has spent months or years inside a system designed to distort reality. They learned through repeated failure and pain to distinguish between the surface presentation and the operational intent behind it. Where most people register charm, they register velocity. They measure how quickly someone moves to establish closeness because they know that artificial intimacy is the first tool in a very specific playbook. Where others hear generosity in words, they listen for the invoice that always follows. Not because they are cynical, but because they have already paid that invoice in full and recognize the billing pattern. The gap they detect is precise. It lives in the space between what a person projects and what a person does when they believe no one is keeping score. The narcissist taught them, unintentionally, to never stop keeping score. Not out of resentment, but out of operational necessity. They learned that the most dangerous moment in any relationship is the one where you stop cross-referencing words with actions. They learned that consistency is not a personality trait, but a measurable behavior, and that anyone who cannot sustain it across small and large moments alike is running a performance, not living a truth. This knowledge does not fade. It does not soften with time. It simply becomes quieter, more efficient, and less interested in explaining itself. And so they become selective. Not selective in the way people use the word casually, as a preference or a mood. Selective in the way a system filters input. They develop thresholds. Certain behaviors that most people tolerate without thought now trigger an immediate reclassification. A conversation that pivots too quickly to guilt. A compliment that feels strategic rather than spontaneous. A request framed as a favor that is actually a test of compliance. These are not red flags to the survivor. They are confirmed signatures. Patterns they have already cataloged, cross-referenced, and resolved never to underestimate again. The emotional trigger has been deactivated. What remains is a clean, dispassionate assessment that requires no debate and invites no negotiation. This is where the solitude begins, not from fear, but from arithmetic. The survivor performed a calculation that most people avoid their entire lives. They measured the actual cost of maintaining a connection with someone who operates through control, and they compared it against the cost of silence, distance, and an empty room. The empty room won. Not because it offered comfort, but because it did not require them to abandon their own clarity in order to keep the peace. The aloneness they chose is not loneliness. It is the removal of a tax they can no longer afford. It is efficiency, not exile. When they cut a connection, they do so without theater. There is no confrontation, no dramatic exit, no speech designed to wound or teach. They simply become unavailable. The door does not slam. It closes with a click so quiet that some people do not realize it has happened until weeks later when they reach for a response and find only stillness. This is not cruelty. It is administration. The survivor has learned that explaining yourself to someone who operates in bad faith is not communication. It is ammunition supply, and they have stopped volunteering for that role. But there is a line here that matters, and it must be drawn clearly. There is a difference between a person who has integrated their experience and a person who has become defined by it. The survivor who has truly completed the process does not wear their history as identity. They do not introduce themselves through the lens of what was done to them. Their trauma has become a technical reference, not a social currency. They do not seek communities organized around shared damage, not because those communities lack value, but because remaining inside the language of victimhood keeps the original architect of that pain in a position of relevance they no longer deserve. The moment your survival becomes your primary characteristic, you have handed the narcissist a legacy they did not earn. The completed survivor refuses this. They file the experience under operational knowledge and move forward without footnotes. There is also the matter of vigilance and its shadow. The same system that protects can, if left unchecked, begin to distort. Hypervigilance, masquerading as wisdom, is not progress. It is the trauma operating under a different name. The functional survivor recognizes this distinction. They do not see threats in every room. They do not assume malice behind every inconsistency. What they do is identify with remarkable speed where investment is unlikely to yield a return, and they redirect their energy without guilt. They have not sealed the doors. They have installed a checkpoint. And the checkpoint is rigorous, not because they are afraid of what might enter, but because they have a precise understanding of what they are protecting and why it matters. The result is a person who is, in the most practical sense, immune to the mechanisms that once destroyed them. Guilt as a lever no longer functions because they have disassembled the machine that made it effective. Obligation as a trap no longer holds because they have learned to distinguish between genuine responsibility and manufactured debt. The phrase that once worked, the carefully timed accusation, the wounded tone deployed at the exact moment of boundary setting, these tools now arrive and find no surface to grip. The survivor has changed the material of the wall. What once absorbed every blow now reflects it back as data, confirmation that the distance they chose was correct. This is why they unsettle people. Not because they are cold, not because they are damaged, but because they are operating with a level of clarity that most social environments are not designed to accommodate. They do not need approval to sustain their decisions. They do not need consensus to validate their perception. They have already lived inside a world where consensus was a weapon and approval was a trap. Having survived that, the opinions of casual observers carry no operational weight. They are polite about this, they are even warm, but they are not available for renegotiation. The solitary person who has survived a narcissist and emerged intact is not broken. They are recalibrated. Their standards are not walls built from pain. They are filters built from knowledge. Their solitude is not a wound. It is a territory they have cleared and now maintain with deliberate attention. They do not need you to understand this. They do not need you to agree. The construction is already complete, and it was not built to impress anyone. It was built to function, and it does.